Okay, so we're going to look at moving beyond customer-centric innovation and how we would enable ecosystems as a result of it. So we're going to dive into some more of the how and the whys. 15 years ago, I never would have imagined that customer-centric innovation would be tasked with saving the world, but that's the odd situation that we find ourselves in today. And I'm going to take you on a little journey to explore how we got there and potentially what to do about it moving forwards. When I grew up, I was given these magazines called How and Why. It's really framed how I think about the world. I'm sure they were given to parents to stop their children from asking annoying why questions to their parents the whole time, but it was something that very much formed what I do and how I think. So I'm going to bring some of that thinking to you. And this is the type of thinking we do at Explorer Labs, where we're helping large organizations become sustainable business innovators, so helping them with strategy through capabilities and impact support. And we're lucky enough to do this built on experience with some of the world's largest organizations, helping them through those processes. And we'll dive into some of these things now. So looking at customer centricity, how did we actually get to customer centricity? Well, it's nothing new, as you're probably all aware. It's been around since the 1960s. It's taken on various different names over the years. You may be familiar with things like design thinking, obviously agile development, a big part in telco, lean startup more recently. But now we're sort of in this new phase. What is this new phase? It's arguably the ecosystems age. We've gone through the distribution, the information, the customer age, and we're sort of emerging into this ecosystems thinking now. A lot of this has come from this book called Change by Design by Tim Brown back in 2009. This little diagram has a lot to answer for. It's the reason why we have customer-centric innovation, which we'll build upon. But it's about starting with the desirability, then figuring out the business case, and then figuring out the feasibility in that order. And that has some pluses and minuses. Since then, this kind of thinking has gone stratospheric. There's over 500,000 hits just on this diagram alone on Google, but it has some severe limitations in our thinking, which we'll dive into shortly. But as you know, this is nothing new. This is about trying to map customer needs closely to what the business is trying to do and closing the gap between these two ideals, if you like. So the logic that underpins innovation practice is about always starting with the customer, then figuring out the business case, and then figuring out the technical stuff at the end of it. That's how customer-centric innovation works, but this is severely limiting what we can actually achieve. It's all about trying to avoid this, so trying to avoid building something that nobody wants. This has been the case for so long, deploying all these resources and not actually creating something that anybody wants at the end of it. The customer-centric thinking went stratospheric back in 2014 with this little chart that showed that customer-centric firms outperform those that aren't customer-centric by 228%. And that suddenly catches the attention of all the board members. Funding's released automatically, and the rest is history. Design thinking in particular was the framework with its deep phases on customer empathy as the dominant methodology to adopt. And then soon followed hundreds of variations of playbooks and toolbox and corporate training programs, workplace redesigns, all the rest of it. So at this point, the whole process goes everywhere, and you've probably seen a load of these lying around in your own workplaces. And then, yeah, we have workshops galore, a lot of post-it theatre, potentially. I've been responsible for some of this, having trained over 2,000 people over the last 10 years. But in that time, I've noticed where the limitations are and what we can potentially do about them. The other interesting thing is that we have this idea that if we start with customer centricity, we can magically transform an entire organization in 5 easy stages. And this is the dominant logic that's even pushed out today. I pulled this up 6 weeks ago from Salesforce on Forbes. It just shows how prolific this thinking is, that, you know, start with customers and everything else will be fine. It's not really the case, as we shall see. So why did this happen? Let's go a little bit deeper and try and understand what's actually going on here. What we're trying to do is manage this process. This is the fuzzy front end, we call the process, what the innovation or business design process feels like. We're trying to manage all this uncertainty. So we're trying to get away from this, which is building something over a long period of time, releasing it later on, and then only getting validation to realize that nobody wants it. So what we've done is we've built these methodologies to break up risk and uncertainty into small, manageable chunks so we can kill projects quickly, we can reassign resources if we need to, but that's essentially what the process is doing. When we map this across the standard innovation process, there are methodologies to enable us to know. It's a knowledge generation process. And then we have these methodologies neatly mapped across the whole process. And it's quite an achievement that we've got to. It's taken us 60 years to get to this point, but it's designed for a specific customer-centric purpose. So what's the problem then? I hear you all asking me. The problem is that this has limitations that I've hinted at. The methods tend to focus on individuals and small groups of people, okay? Small groups of problem owners. This means that they fail to account for broader stakeholder perspectives, which means that they fail to address complex issues, wicked problems, systemic challenges, as we've seen in the first presentation, and they tend to generate solutions on the limitations on what we already know. So we need to overcome these barriers. On the problem side, on the problem fit, the knowledge really comes from existing customer experiences, so their existing frames of reference and trying to understand that through these customer-centric methods. This has limitations. On the solution fit side, the knowledge typically comes from the team members themselves. It's limited by what the team members in the workshops actually know and can bring to the session. So how do we actually overcome that limitation? This can also lead to incrementalism, we want to obviously get away from that. We want solutions that are far away from home that can tackle big, radical, systemic issues. So what we have is a knowledge constraint issue. We have a tight coupling of our understanding of problems and their potential solutions, and we're in this sort of vicious cycle that we need to broaden out and come to better solutions. It's like looking for your keys under a streetlight. You're only going to look for what you can see in your immediate environment. It's very hard to see what's beyond. And so the approaches I'm going to share with you are about how to actually go beyond these limitations. What are the painful outcomes for you? How are you actually going to feel these pains? It can result in incremental innovation despite what you're intending to do. The solutions can be too close to your mothership, not getting far enough away from where you are already. The wider systemic challenges are out of reach using these methods. Growth opportunities are simply left on the table as a result. There can be a mismatch between your stakeholder preferences and what your organization is actually capable of delivering. And your innovation can soon be perceived as theatre productions, as we saw in the black and white slide earlier, which can lead to a loss of appetite for future innovation, which means, ironically, that your company is more open to disruption, which is obviously not what the game is all about. Everyone loves a good Ford and Jobs quote whenever talking about innovation, so here's one that everyone knows about, asking about faster horses. So he was saying that if we asked everybody what they wanted, they would ask for faster horses. But what was he actually saying there? What is he really saying? He's saying that we need to broaden our stocks of knowledge and then seek the right solutions. I'm not asking customers for their solutions, but trying to understand their problems better. So it's a backward-thinking approach. On Steve Jobs' side, he was a visionary person. So he was saying you have to trust in the dots that they will somehow connect in your future. He was alluding to something in the future and working back to it. So he was asking us to expand our future near possible knowledge and then map those back to what we know as the problems now. So it's a dual-angled approach. So looking at the bigger and broader issues, we have these things called wicked problems. So these have specific characteristics, that there's no right solution, that interventions can have very serious unintended consequences. There are many different stakeholder perspectives. Problems may never be solved completely. The list goes on. They're very severe challenges. Basically, the problems are much more complex to understand. But these are the key characteristics to consider. This is what it feels like, right? It's a big pile of spaghetti. That neat little fuzzy squiggle now becomes a vastly complex mess to try and sort out. So the fuzzy is now even fuzzier. When we look at the types of problems that we can solve with these approaches, from low stakeholders to high complexity, the customer-centric tools and methods that we have so far are designed for the tame problems. They're not designed to help us get to the wicked problems. This is the limitation that we're facing. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. If you've seen Apollo 13, it's just not going to work. We're trying to bodge our approach to doing that. So this is why these methodologies are tasked with doing something they're just not designed to do. Everyone's aware of what these sustainability goals are, but really what they are is a list of wicked problems for us to solve. There are 17 of them that I'm sure you're all aware. These are the ones that are mostly related to the telco industry, and this afternoon we're going to be working on these specific ones in the workshop, so look forward to that for those who are joining. And then how do we actually tackle these problems? How do we tackle these end targets with these approaches? Well, firstly, it starts from shifting our approach from shareholder value to the idea of stakeholder value. There are lots of different stakeholders that are involved in the process. There's social and environmental and economic considerations within that, but the sphere of complexity is changing and getting more complicated. We need to broaden our logic for innovation. So instead of starting with customer desirability, we need to think about the people on a social desirability level. We need to understand the planetary level issues from the environmental perspectives. So we need to broaden how we start the innovation process, not just thinking about the profit and the technology side of things. We need to understand that we need to create value beyond the business needs. There are all sorts of different value types from the people side, the planet side, the profit side, the progress side. We need to broaden our understanding of what kinds of value can we actually create and integrate into our processes. So if we're looking at the limitations of the customer-centric approaches that I mentioned earlier, let's start to look at some possible ways forward. One approach is to go beyond the limitations of design thinking, which is focusing on these customer-centric problems, but looking at systemic design, systems thinking, understanding complex systems of interaction as the starting point for the innovation process. Here's an example of what a basic systems map looks like. So you have the scope of the boundary of your system. You then have specific variables within your system. They're not stakeholders, but they're variables. You look at what are the interactions between these variables, what is influencing what, where are the causal loops happening, and then where can we highlight areas for future change. So you're managing massive complexity. And here's an example of the COVID-19 systems map. But once you start to map out all the interactions, you can see across the system where the specific points of leverage can be, and then designing interventions to address those specific areas to influence systemic change. Looking at how we upgrade the empathy phase, this is about mapping and understanding the system level of what's happening, designing a future state and agreeing on what that is, making specific interventions to get to that future state, and then implementing transitions to enable you to get there. This is what the Fordian approach is about, understanding the problem space much better, broadening that understanding. We have the approaches already to do that. When we look at the methods to looking at the problems and the limitations of what's already known, we want to broaden our understanding of what the potential solution space can look like. This is where things like speculative design, future-back thinking, and deep tech acceleration techniques will become very useful. They broaden our stocks of knowledge about the problem space. It gets us away from the limitations of traditional workshop settings. So we're feeding in other sources of knowledge at the same time as we're expanding our areas on the solutions side before going to market fit and scaling. This is what a deep tech acceleration model looks like. This is basically what Steve Jobs does in his mind, but it's mapped as a systematic process. You start with the scientific discovery. You map the different value types from the different technology readiness levels. Then you understand what the stakeholder needs are at those different levels, and then do rapid experimentation along that process to find where the future back opportunities are by broadening out that problem space area. We're pioneering these approaches in an academic research center across industry and academia at Imperial College Business School with Royal College of Art, where we're developing digital methodologies for these. So if you want to dive into more details in this, check out wickedacceleration.org, where we're really pioneering these approaches to attacking these elements from the solution side. So finally then, what are the next steps for you? What should I make you take away from this session today? It's about upgrading our approaches to tackle these ecosystem level challenges. So what are the better ways to address wicked problems? Well, we have these new methodologies to expand our understanding of the early stage of the process. We can augment what we've already built upon. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to add in the right methodologies at the right time. So adding in ecosystem strategy formation processes, adding in speculative design, systemic thinking. We can upgrade the processes. Then we have an end-to-end set of methodologies that can actually address the problems that we're facing moving forwards. So it's within reach. Now, if there's one slide I would love you to take your cameras out and take a picture of, it will be this one that we're building up to, because this gives you the big picture of how this all fits together. So you're starting with your ecosystem strategy. Here's roughly what you do in that stage. Then looking at mapping your systems, understanding the dynamics, what's going on, how can we intervene, what are the consequences. Then mapping that into design thinking. That becomes a complementary process to what you probably already have developed in-house already. Adding in speculative design, future-back thinking on the solution side, and then moving forward into implementation side with lean startup, business model innovation, and agile development. And it's a lot of information, but this is what an integrated innovation process looks like that can actually start to solve some of the biggest challenges of our time. So it is within reach, so I'm hoping that this inspires you moving forwards, that we need to adapt our approaches subtly but significantly in order to tackle the challenges we're actually facing. So this afternoon we're going to be diving into this part of it. We're not going to do all of it, so those that are joining, get ready for doing some of this. We'll be diving into a case study with World Economic Forum on their approach to enabling circular economy, and we'll be running a workshop along those lines as well. So looking forward to joining those who will be joining that one this afternoon. That's it from me, but thank you very much for listening. This is the other slide you might want to take a picture of. But I very much look forward to having conversations with you over the next few days. Thank you very much.